Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Peter Shea. I am a instructional designer who works in American higher education. I'm also a college instructor. I've been teaching college writing for about 20 plus years. Which is more as I reflect upon it. It's hard to believe. And I'm also a passionate believer in the use of educational technology to get better results for learners. And one of the things I'll be talking about today is how I've used a tool like BranchTrack to create what we call interactive open educational resources. From the poll that we took, it seems to indicate that a number of you are already at least basically familiar with what an open educational resource is. But I'm going to still go ahead and offer a brief definition of OER. Open educational resources are resources that are created to be freely distributed without cost to anyone, as well as a basic license for end users to use the content and remix it in order to create new content, which then can in turn be shared with others. Often this is done by adding a Creative Commons license, and if you're not familiar with Creative Commons, go to creativecommons.org. They're one of the organizations that helps facilitate the use of open educational resources. Interactive open educational resources are still fairly new. If you look at a lot of the OER that's out there, one of the first things you should notice is that it looks an awful lot like the things that could and were produced in the pre-digital age, handouts and textbooks and so on and so forth. There's some video and there's some audio, but a lot of the content are things that would have been happy in a print environment. And so my concern for a couple of years has been that the OER movement has not made sufficient use of the unique qualities that can be found in a digital environment. And so I've really made a point of trying to promote interactive open educational resources. And one of the best definitions of what iOER is came from a book recently published by John Schenk, who is an instructional design librarian, I believe, at Penn State University. And his definition is, it's a discrete digital interactive instructional resource used to teach a specific learning objective in a course or curriculum. Now, my interest in interactive tools for learning started many years ago, and for me, as well as many people, it started with Clark Aldrich. I was working as a instructional technologist and webmaster at a College of Medicine many years ago at a university in Florida, and as I was walking through the school library, they had a display for new books, and one of the books was entitled Simulations in the Future of Learning. And I read it, and I was immediately floored. I thought, this is absolutely right. This is where we should be going, and this is what I want to be doing. And Clark has, for many years, been a very passionate advocate about the possibilities of using simulation-based learning to achieve deeper learning outcomes for students and learners of all ages. And one of the key themes that Clark has often hit upon is that the traditional linear content, which is to say most of OER that's out there, books, movies, lectures, focus on passive content of learning to know rather than the active content of learning to do. And if you haven't seen Clark's book, The Complete Guide to Simulations in Serious Games, I strongly recommend that you obtain a copy, or take a look at his own work with simulations at shortsims.com, where you'll see other examples of good uses of BranchTrack. Now, I've been using BranchTrack, I think, for maybe 2 years, and I really like it because it's easy to use. I'm not a programmer, and what's more, when I work with faculty, I have to be very careful in the selection of tools, because many of the faculty that I've encountered over the years, regardless of their expertise in a particular domain area, are often very anxious about technology. They're technophobic. And so I like tools that are very, very simple to use. And I have to remember that the bar for many faculty tends to be lower than many people who are involved in educational technology. I can still remember the anxieties that people encountered when they had to learn how to use PowerPoint. So when I talk about the tools that I use to help partner with them to create interactive open educational resources, I show them BranchTrack, and I say basically a fifth grader could learn how to use this tool, because the emphasis is on the choices, the decisions paths that people are making, not on the bells and whistles that are often found in more complex tools. And this is a problem that I think has often occurred with educational technology. People have created tools that are increasingly sophisticated but are hard to use, and they forget the fact that ultimately the quality of an educational artifact falls upon the skill of the creator and not the complexity of the software. The example being, of course, that painters, whether they're inept painters or great painters, at the end of the day, are still all using paintbrushes. So it's not the complexity of the tool, it's the skill of the user. And that's what I think BranchTrack understands, is that in order to create really powerful learning experiences, all you have to do is have imagination, scenario, and some good writing skills. And here are a couple of examples. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my first career in higher education is a writing teacher, and I've always been very frustrated by the fact that students don't get a chance to practice making rhetorical decisions. In other words, what approach should I use to write this particular essay or document? They don't get much opportunity to get immediate feedback, and I thought, a simulation of the decision-making process in writing would really help a lot of students, because they could make selections in response to a writing prompt and get immediate feedback. I started calling this approach rhetorical simulation, or RHET Sims, and it came to me many years ago when I was working in a college of medicine and looking at the simulation lab for doctors and thinking, gee whiz, it would really be great if ordinary students had access to some really useful learning tool like that. So I've created a couple of sims to help mimic the decisions that student writers make. I've also branched out into other areas as well. The first short sim I made many years ago, and then I recreated it in BranchTrack, was one called Act Utilitarian. It was an attempt to teach students how to make decisions like the adherent to a particular philosophical approach. And last year I created one about writing learning outcomes for faculty. And in each case, I've been very satisfied by the results. When I've used BranchTrack to create my open educational interactive resources, one of the things I've liked about it is that, again, it's simple to build and it gives the end users immediate feedback. One of the problems in college writing is that students often don't think too hard about audience, because they always imagine their audience being their instructor. But the paradox, of course, is that they're preparing to learn how to write for audiences outside of the academy. And sometimes their readers will come from a diversity of backgrounds, and they need to anticipate that when they're writing. So using BranchTrack, I created a sample document which had two target audience. One was an American college student, and one was a Chinese-born college student studying in America. And as part of the responses to the writing prompt, a few of them were perfectly appropriate for an American-born student, but some of the other choices would not have been appropriate because they use idiomatic speech that a foreign-born student might not understand. And it's a very short sim. It only takes about 2 or 3 minutes, but I think it very quickly and clearly indicates the importance of understanding that when they write. And you can see on the right side the back end of the sim, and the interface is very simple. So that's very good when talking to teachers about it, because again, you don't want a screen that scares people. And being able to simply grab nodes and move them has proven to be very useful when I'm working, and also useful when I'm showing it to people. So, second here. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in creating are, in terms of interactive open educational resources, are e-textbooks. In OER repositories, there are a lot of free-to-use textbooks, but again, they're traditional linear content. So I've been thinking about creating sims that align with the linear content to be found in the regular OER textbooks, so that if a student of mine in writing class is using an OER book to learn writing, he or she can immediately go after reading a passage and use a short sim to practice the ideas that are found in the textbook. I think this is a very promising approach to introduce simulation-based learning into higher education. I've come to realize that special insight that Steve Jobs had years ago when he understood that it was futile to try to get people to use tablet technology right off the bat, right immediately. But if you integrated tablet technology into a familiar medium like a phone, then they would begin to use that. That's why I think a good connection for simulations are the textbooks, and I think one of the most promising areas for interactive open educational resources will be these kind of interactive textbooks. There's another thing that's become very important in higher education, which is exploring new forms of educational assessment. I contributed recently to a book by educational assessment expert Peggy Mackay, and the book is called Real-Time Student Assessment, Meeting the Imperative to Improve Time to Degree and Closing the Opportunity Gap for Assuring Student Competence for 21st Century Needs. And my contribution was called All Play Means Something, using simulation support assessment and instruction. And there's a link there on the slide to an online copy of that sub-appendix chapter if anyone wants to read it. My point being is that simulations are no longer just about engaging learning. They are a great way to get summative assessment in terms of where a learner is, which is why it's important for them to encounter them in an e-textbook format. And one of the things that I've really been pleased about in terms of the development of BranchTrack is that it has an ability to capture assessment data. I remember talking to Sergey probably a few years ago about having this kind of functionality, and I'm really glad it's there, because moving forward, I think any learning tool that doesn't give you some easy to access data about what the learners are doing while they're engaging in the tool won't be terribly useful. So I've been really pleased by this particular development, and I'm looking forward to making great use of it this summer. I have an online writing course which I'm putting together, and there will be a number of short sims related to the topics in the course. And I'm also using it in conjunction with a automated writing feedback tool called eCree. So I'm really trying to create a very model 21st century writing course where students practice their writing in part through simulations. Then they write their own essays, and then they submit their essays to an artificial intelligence system, which gives them basic feedback on organization and theme and structure. So hopefully going forward, that will be the kind of model that you're beginning to see more and more, because the big problem with writing is that when people make decisions, they usually have to wait a long time before they get any feedback at all as to whether that decision was an effective one or an ineffective one. So I'm really trying to use these tools to close the gap between the writing action and the feedback. So for those of you who are thinking about designing iOER, just a few lessons I wanted to talk about that I've learned. If you're working with faculty, it's very important to keep in mind that many of them are coming from an instructional paradigm in which these kind of tools have no easy fit. So it's very important that you develop that relationship with them and explain it as much as possible and give them models. And when it comes to their contribution, if you have some sort of document where you can give them, where they can, an easy-to-use template, where they can fill in and give you the information about scenarios and decision points, and then if you're the one building the sim, then you can use that design document for your work. Again, you want to make it as simple as possible for the faculty, because apart from the fact that they're very busy, you want to get buy-in to start creating these kind of tools. Yeah, and again, cite research literature as much as possible to emphasize why using a tool like this is important in terms of increasing student engagement and as a novel way of promoting learning assessment. Remember that for schools, it's very important to adhere to universal design for learning principles so that all learners can get easy access to the content. When you create the iOER and you put it on some sort of platform, it's a very good idea to apply for a Creative Commons license. And by apply, I mean go to the website, put in your information, and have them auto-generate a license that you can put on your work. It takes about 2 minutes. And as much as possible, form a community of practice with others, because those of us engaged in this work are really pioneers, and we need as much support from one another as possible, as well as a fresh exchange of ideas and candid feedback about the effectiveness of our work. So I've probably sped through some of those material rather quickly, probably about 10 minutes early. That's fine for me because I'm really here for the questions and the conversation. So after having given that overview, if it's okay with everybody here, I'd like to simply open it up for questions and perhaps some more polling that Sergey might want to do.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. We do have a questions pane and chat pane available to all the attendees. Please feel free to use it. I have a question in the meantime. So, what motivates you to actually create these open resources? Because I understand this is quite a bit of work and creativity, but also has zero commercial potential, because under Creative Commons, you're just giving the materials to the world for free. So what is your motivation to actually be doing that?
It's funny that you should say that. You know, I joke a lot about people in the OER community. I said, you're all digital socialists. But seriously, there are two reasons. One is that during my day job as an instructional designer, I, like many instructional designers, don't get asked to do terribly creative things. Despite the years we put into our work and honing our craft, we often get questions like, can you help me with my PowerPoint? How did I fix this in my online course? And those are things we're happy to do, but they're so far below what we can do. So sometimes the only way to really show people what we can do is to build open educational resources and put them out there in the world so they can say, oh, I had no idea. Because if we wait for them to ask us, they never will, because they don't understand these things. And secondly, if you're an instructional designer and you also do commercial work on the side, this is a great way to hone your talents so that when you're ready to really put out a portfolio, you can show people, you know, what you're doing. So I think it works both in terms of contributing to the public good and to your own good as an independent worker.
Thank you. And I will pose as a presenter for this webinar, and I will be reading out questions for you. I guess it'll be more convenient if that's all right with you.
Sure.
So one question we have, Peter, how do you come up with those scenarios? I mean, one should be a writer to have a story in mind, right? So that the creative aspect, tell us about it.
It's really, for me, it's simple. I've been a writing teacher since at least 1993, and when you're a writing teacher, you give any number of prompts to students so they can practice essay writing in your courses, as well as other courses like professional writing. So what I generally do is I start with the kind of prompt that a student would get in a writing class in order to practice, say, their argumentation skills. And then I create a few different drafts based upon my knowledge of student writing and responses. And then after I've created these multiple drafts, you know, good, maybe okay, maybe not so great, I then put them into BranchTrack and then create the links between them. And that's basically, it's really quite simple. when you've seen literally thousands of student papers and you have any number of prompts that can be used in academic setting, you have a lot of material to work with.
Um, Thank you. Another question. So, could you please talk about the AI, the artificial intelligence writing evaluator that you mentioned? How does it do what it does, and what kind of feedback does it provide?
Um, the AI that's being used now by companies that are beginning to branch out into creating automated feedback uses what I believe is called natural language processing. It's a sophisticated approach to analyzing a text, and based upon some initial feedback, in other words, if they have an understanding of what was intended by the writer, they can go into the text and do an analysis of whether or not the writer is providing sufficient detail, whether they're staying focused, whether the organization is effective or not. And again, it's not at the highest level as you get from a human reader, but for many students, particularly in those early drafts, who just need to have the basic feedback about organization, theme, and detail, it's a pretty good use of this technology. And for years, I've wanted something like that because when you're looking at literally hundreds of papers, you only have so much energy to put into reading and responding. Um, and if I can put off some of that effort to a machine which can respond quickly to a student paper, then it's a win for me and it's a win for the student. The idea is that after getting the automated feedback from the AI, I will get a superior draft, which then at the end, as the instructor, I will read and give more detailed, higher level feedback. And the company that I've been working with on this is called eCree, ECREE.com. And I've tested out their tool. I gave it a pretty good test. There's a professor at MIT called Les Perelman. He was head of the writing program, and he was for many years very skeptical of a machine's ability to quote unquote read a student document, read a human document and respond to it. So he and his students created a tool you can find it on the web called the Babel generator. And the Babel generator basically creates a nonsensical document which a human being would immediately recognize as being meaningless, but a machine might not. And the Babel generator was a good way of testing whether or not any sort of software could do a sufficiently good job of reading and responding to a human document. So when I got eCree, I went to Perelman's site and I generated a nonsensical essay. And then I wrote a short essay myself, like the one the students might write. And so when I submitted the nonsensical essay, it didn't immediately say this is nonsense, but when it did scan the whole document, it assigned it a letter grade of an F. So it knew that it was nonsensical. And when I assigned it my essay, it responded paragraph to paragraph and gave it a B. I thought I deserved a B plus, but that's a different issue.
Well done.
So I thought, okay, that's a good sign. So I spoke with them, and it was designed by a literature professor and a computer programmer. So I think their combined expertise probably has produced a pretty good product, and I'm more than happy to use it and test it out. An interesting thing about Perelman, who is for so long has been anti the use of computers in assessing writing, recently joined a startup as their consultant. I guess he's waving the white flag. He's now, after saying it's never going to happen, the computers can't do it, he's now signed on to be their, I guess, their chief writing consultant. So I think, you know, when someone as firm in his conviction that computers can't do it, as Perelman suddenly sees the light, I think it's a good sign.
Excellent. Thank you. I think AI has an enormous future in education. I recently read an article describing how IBM Watson, which is a very popular AI engine, was used to replace teaching assistants for a course, and at the end of the semester, it actually scored much higher feedback points than human course or teaching assistants, because it was always on time. It never messed up any information, and it could respond, any time, day or night. And most of the questions that are asked are still kind of basic, that even AI can do that.
Right.
So that's just one example. So there are a couple of comments and questions about SIMs. I'll bundle them together. So Tamina says that SIMs are a great way to produce formative assessment, which is so critical in writing courses, which I personally totally agree. And so there is a question then. So I create a lot of courses where I insert interactive pages. I'd like to start creating SIMs and need examples to get started. Where can I find these examples? Well, I can tell you for sure that shortsims.com, a website by Aldrich, has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
examples. You can also check out branchtrack.com/samples. There are a couple of samples. There's a blog by Kathy Moore, Moore, that you can Google and find. She shares quite a few examples of scenario-based training, but mostly for the corporate world. I don't know, any other pointers? Yeah.
Well, my own blog,
Well,
oerinteractive.org,
it's
has
quite
my.
interesting.
It's right. Yeah, it's right there, and it's not just my work; it's the other examples that I found. I'm hoping in the future to find more, but I haven't found as much as I'd like. But I have my work up there, so by all means, go there and take a look at my work. And if you have any questions about the design process, I'm more than happy to answer.
There's a question, where do you host your resources? And I want to jump in and say that if you build something with BranchTrack, then it's hosted on BranchTrack and it's free to host it and distribute to as many people as you like. So there's one benefit of it. So check out branchtrack.com. Where do you host your stuff?
Well, I host it on BranchTrack, and again, going back to the assessment issue, you see, I had an interesting conversation a couple of years ago with a gentleman named Porter Stoll who works at IBM, and he promotes simulations and serious games, and he expressed to me frustration. He said, people always want proof, absolute proof, that this learning media has an impact. He said, nobody ever asks to prove that a series of lectures by an instructor or a textbook has a direct impact on student learning. It's just assumed. But with our new tools, they want absolute evidence. So my thinking, particularly with things like this, it's always important to put it out there, but also in a way that you can get that data that shows that people are using it and that it's making an impact. So I think we need smart learning tools, and that's why I think having something like the BranchTrack Insights tool is a very useful thing.
Thank you. There are two questions about templates. So one is, do you have an example of template that you sent to faculty? And also, what tools do you use to create such templates, especially for like larger branching projects?
I've often used PowerPoint, and again, what I've done in the past is I've sent a PowerPoint template, and I'd be happy to share with anybody who's interested. It says here, just put the scenario in here. Tell me 3 decisions that the student would make that might be, incorrect. Tell me the outcomes of them, and then give me 2 more scenarios. And keep the structure very simple. Now, someone like Clark will tell you there's far more complexity um, uh, that you can build into a sim. But when you're starting people out, you want to keep it simple, and then once they get buy-in, then you can slowly increase the complexity of it. So I just send them a PowerPoint, and I say, in the first slide, put this information. Second slide, put the feedback, and so forth and so on, and then send it back to me. And if I have any questions, I can go back and forth. But I think using a medium like PowerPoint that they're familiar with makes it more comfortable for them.
Thank you. I think one of our final questions is if you could please share some tips on forming and running a community. You mentioned the community of iOER specialists, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, the iOER people I know right now, I can count on my hand. Uh, if people want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to create some sort of community. I work in a Facebook group right now called Instructional Designers in Education, which is a place where a number of people doing instructional design in higher ed go anywhere. So I think it's a good place to start. If there are sufficient numbers of people who are just interested in talking about iOER, I'd be happy to create another social media group.
Thank you. There's another question about K-12 versus adult learning. So do you think that K-12 environments and teachers can also utilize open educational resources and SIMs?
Oh yes, definitely. It's open. It's. I work in higher ed, um, but um, but it's again, open educational resources are intended for anyone, K through graduate school. So by all means, yeah, I do think that it can be used for anyone.
Um, Excellent. Um, and going back to the AI discussion, so what could you suggest as example to see how AI could work? So, for example, those AIs that check the essays, have you seen anything openly available?
Yeah, like I said before, I've only started doing it this year. So I would start with, I learned about eCreep through my friend at IBM who assesses educational technology. And when we were talking about technology and teaching and writing, he pointed me to this particular company. It's a startup in North Carolina, and you can sign up for a demo account. It doesn't cost you anything. And you can upload things, and I believe you can use it with a class for a semester for free. I double check on that, but uh, that's how I started. I just signed on for a free demo, and then I gave it a couple of samples, and I waited to see what kind of feedback I got. So I would, definitely. And I agree with Sergey. I think AI in education is going to become very, very big, but I do think it's very important how it's approached. AI in the workplace is obviously a source of anxiety for many people, and faculty, if they think that we're introducing a tool which is going to make them obsolete, they might resist. I say this is not about replacing you; it's about giving you a virtual teaching assistant, and that they understand. And that when I approach it that way, they embrace the idea. I'm hoping to pilot a group of faculty at my college using this tool in their own writing courses, and not just in typical college composition courses, but in other courses as well, like science courses.
Thank
And
you.
that,
There are a few
and that was.
people.
Mhm.
Uh, there are a few people who are asking to either post a link or spell slowly the e-Cree company that you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Here, let me
Uh,
post it in the chat box.
yeah, or just on screen, we can see your screen.
Yeah, and yeah, if I'll here, let me add it to the slide. Just give me a second here. Just and sorry, go to the end of the slide there, and here, ecree.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Um, yes, there are people saying thank you. And these are all the questions for today. Thank you so much. This has been very, I would say, inspiring. I personally am a Wikipedia contributor, so I do contribute to open educational resources, in
Hmm.
my particular case on Wikipedia, which I think is a great educational resource, and
Yeah.
Jimmy Page should get a Nobel Prize or something at some point.
Okay.
And so it's great to see people who are like-minded, and then I think that people are inspired by that. Let me conclude this with, first of all, thank you so much for sharing. This has been really great, and I wanted to run a quick poll. So if you'd like us to, or Peter, get in touch with you if you want to learn more about interactive open educational resources and be part of community of practice, please say yes, and we'll get in touch with you by email, or say no, and that's perfectly all right.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Sergey.
Right, and just a quick question for everyone, since we have a lot of enlightened people here.
Mhm.
A quick poll. Would you like to share your story in one of our next Q&A webinars? So if you have something to tell, if you've built something or you have experience with something that inspires educators around the globe, we'd be happy to host a webinar for you and work with you to share it. Again, say yes and we'll be in touch by email. I'll give it a few seconds to conclude. All right. Thank you so much, and thank you, Peter, for joining. Thank you, everyone. We will be sending out the recording shortly. If you want to share it with a larger group of people, please join our next webinar next Tuesday, and follow BranchTrack.com for updates, resources, inspiration, and a pretty cool tool for building branching scenarios in Sims. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.